Hello, these are your graphing population notes for the week. We are going to review some vocabulary and introduce some new vocabulary that's going to help you with your assignments for the week. As you watch the video, make sure that you guys pause as you need to or go back and review and rewind if you guys are confused about any of the terms that we cover. So remember last week we learned that a population is all of the individuals of one species living in one region at the same time. So some examples to reinforce this and idea is if we looked at all of the elk in Rocky Mountain National Park, or if we looked at all of the bacteria in one of the classrooms at A West. Another one is all of the rattlesnakes on North Table Mountain. The key to remembering the definition of a population is that we are looking at one species in one area at the same time when we are looking at the population. Now we know that populations change over time. What are some things that you think can cause a population to change over time? Think about that one for a second. And in ecology, graphing population change over time helps scientists to see more clearly what's happening to the population and to make predictions. Now, why might scientists want to make predictions about a population? The reason that scientists want to do this and why we are going to do this in this class as well is because we need to understand, is the population growing? Is it decreasing? Is it remaining the same? What do we think is going to happen over time to this population? And we also need to understand what factors are affecting that population size. When we look at the population graphs, you guys are going to see two main types. We are going to see exponential and logistic. Exponential graphs are sometimes called a J-curve because they look like a J. And logistical growth graphs are sometimes called an S-curve because they look like an S. And we can see some terms here that we're going to go into more detail, but we can see that exponential is unrestricted, whereas logistic growth is restricted. And we're going to talk about why that is. So for the first type, exponential growth, we can see that the population grows by an increasing number of individuals every year. So here's our graph. We have population size on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. And so we see that over time, the population size increases compared to the year before that. And so again, it's just going up very, very quickly. So you guys might have heard of exponential growth in your math class. It's the same thing that we're going to see here. The other type of graph that we see is a logistic growth. And this is the population grows until it reaches carrying capacity and then levels off. And you might be wondering, what is carrying capacity? Well, carrying capacity is the number of organisms that a region can support. So when we see a logistic growth, we can see that it had an exponential growth until it reached the number of organisms that the environment could support. What are some things that you think could affect the population size in an area? Well, when a population reaches the region's carrying capacity, it has reached the limit of some resource. So maybe you thought about water, space, or food. These are all things that can affect a population's growth, that it can slow it down and reach that carrying capacity. Some other things that can affect the population size are things like disease, water, and environmental events, which we see quite often here in Colorado. But the main things that will slow a population's growth down are if there's limits to water, space, or food. And space is important. The ecosystem or the area that the population is living in needs to have enough space to support all of the individuals of the population. The last type of graph that you guys are going to see this week is a predator-prey graph. And So we can graph the relationship between two different populations, like predator and prey. And this gives us an idea of how these two populations are related to each other. So what do you guys notice in this graph here? If we look at the number of individuals over time, our red line represents the prey, and our blue line represents the predator. What are some observations that you can make? Now, hopefully, you noticed that they cycle compared to each other. So if we have if we have an increase in the predator population, then we see a slight decrease in our prey population. Because if there's more predators, then they need more food. So then they need more prey. One of the other things that you guys should notice is that there is always more prey, or when it's balanced, there's more prey than predators. And so we can see that the two populations will cycle compared to each other. Here is another example of a predator-prey graph. And so we can see here that the green line represents the prey, the rabbit, and the red line represents the predator, or the bobcat. And so, sorry about that, click too soon. When the green line is a lot, there's less predators. The prey are better able to survive when there's less predators. And so we can see that similar cycle that we saw previously as well. So some review questions that you guys should know from these notes. You should be familiar with what is a population. What are the three types of graph we talked about? So remember, we have exponential, logistic, and the predator-prey, or graphing two populations in relation to each other so that we can understand how their populations affect one another. What is carrying capacity? So remember, that is when a population has reached the maximum that the area can support, and it could be due to limiting factors like water, space, or food. And then number 4, you should know what are the two things that can limit the size of a population. So remember, it's not just about the resources that are there, but we can also see things like disease and environmental effects also limit the population size. So hopefully this gives you guys enough background to go and do your assignments for the week. Remember, if you guys have questions or want to clarify anything, to email your teachers. Have a wonderful week.